If you have a check ride coming up soon and you're feeling a little nervous or overwhelmed and not sure exactly how to fully prepare for this, then in this video I'm going to give you 24 tips to better prepare you for the check ride. So I'm currently a flight instructor. I've sent many students on check rides and I have a very high pass rate. I was also a 141 check instructor, and the students I sent to their check rides have had a very good pass rate. And as I'm sitting in front of you right now, I'm currently an industry check airman. So the way I'm going to break this video down is into 3 categories. The first category, the first 10 tips, will be about the oral exam, how to best prepare for that. The second 10 tips will be to best prepare for your flight. And then the final 4 tips will get you into the right mindset before your check ride. So we're going to jump right into it. The first thing that you want to do is, before you enter the room, you want to make sure that you have all of your documents organized. And the best way to do that is to make a binder for it. And I want you to make 7 tabs for this binder. The first tab is going to include a copy of your IACRA. The second will be your ID, so a photocopy of that. Third one will be a copy of your medical certificate. The fourth, a copy of your written exam results, and then your student pilot or temporary certificate. Next one will be with your weight and balance and airworthiness documents. And then the last one will be your PAVE checklist. Having everything organized before your check ride is going to make the check-in process way more smooth, and it's going to make your examiner much happier. So in this video, I'm not just going to give you the stereotypical study hard or keep your mouth shut and only say the minimum words you need to say. Everybody is given that advice, whether it's on YouTube or your instructors. You hear that all the time. But what I'm going to give you is information that you don't regularly hear to pass your check ride. Now, if you want to know exactly where to start to prepare studying for the oral exam, tip number 2 is to start with the skills in the ACS. If you cannot get through all the skills required, then you're not going to pass your check ride. Make sure you have all those skills in order. And also, by the way, examiners most of the time place a greater emphasis on the skills section of the ACS when conducting the check ride, so keep that in mind. Now, another way to prepare for the check ride is to use the PAVE checklist. Now, what do I mean by that? So PAVE, you have pilot in command, you have the aircraft, you have the environment, and you have external factors. So with the PAVE checklist, if you break down each category, and I mean really break it down, then you can cover over 70% of the topics discussed in the oral exam at least. So using the PAVE checklist can really help you study and prepare for this check ride. Now, tip number 4, when studying for your oral exam, don't forget the airplane flying handbook, or if you're flying helicopters, the helicopter flying handbook, or of course the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, specifically with systems. As important as it is to know the ins and outs of your pilot operating handbook, and don't get me wrong, it's extremely important, don't neglect the general systems either. Because, for example, if you are flying a single-engine airplane like a Cessna 172 for your check ride, well, if you get your private pilot certificate, then you are also able to hop in a Piper Cherokee or a Cirrus SR-20, just as long as it's less than 12,500 pounds and not a turbojet, and it's a airplane, single-engine land airplane, then you can fly all of those aircraft. So understanding the general systems is important because your license allows you to do that. So don't forget that. Now, tip number 5, when you're creating the flight plan for your check ride for your examiner, you want to treat this as if you are actually going to fly to this destination. So check the weather, check the NOTAMs, check everything that's going on surrounding that airport. Check the fuel prices. Treat it as if you are actually going to fly there. And when you hop in the plane as well, get everything set up. If you have fancy avionics, get those set up. And make sure that you're doing everything as if you're going to actually go to that place, because that's how the DPE is going to conduct this check ride. So be sure you are truly preparing for that. Now, tip number 6, and a lot of people tend to neglect this, but the 6th tip is to never forget about the other regions or terrain in the United States. So if you are coming from a state like Florida, where you're at a low altitude and you're right on the coast, the airplane performance is going to be way different than if you were to fly into the mountains, around the mountains in Colorado, and also mountain flying, any of those kinds of things. It's also going to be different than if you were flying in the Pacific Northwest, like Washington or Oregon, where you have to deal with IFR and cloudy weather all the time, low visibility. So don't forget the other regions, because when you get your private pilot certificate, you are allowed to fly anywhere in the United States, and all the rules are the same across. Now, tip number 7. This is a simple tip, but also very effective nevertheless. And that is, if your examiner is telling you any kind of stories during your Checkride oral exam, you just want to keep your mouth shut and listen to those stories. But more importantly, you want to ask them about those stories that they're telling. So, for example, ask them, what was that like? Or how did you do that? How did that happen? Keep them talking, and more time will pass as a result, and it will make your oral exam just a little bit easier. Now, tip number 8, and this is one of my favorite tips for the oral exam. A lot of students have asked me, when is it okay to look up the answer for a Checkride? And here's a good rule of thumb. If you are in the air and you are unable to open a book while flying, then you should probably know that information. So, for example, you should know your V-speeds by memory. You should know your light gun signals by memory, and you should know the general operating rules up in the air by memory. Now, what is something that's okay to look up? Airworthiness is perfectly fine, because if you're checking the airworthiness of an airplane or a helicopter, you're going to be on the ground while doing it. So, for example, preventive maintenance, you have a whole list on 43 Appendix A. You have the whole list of things that you can perform preventive maintenance on by yourself, and I guarantee you, no DPE has that entire list memorized. I don't have it memorized even. So that's the best rule of thumb that I can give you. Now, tip number 9, and this is really a quick tip, but if you're being asked a question in an absolute form, the answer is usually going to be no. So any words like always or never, well, usually the answer is probably going to be no. So, for example, do cold fronts always create thunderstorms? Well, the answer is no, not always, but often yes, but not always. So anything with absolutes, the answer is usually going to be no. And then finally, the last tip I have for the oral exam is, if you are stuck on a question, you can always ask the examiner where they are in the ACS. When you do that, you can go to the top of the page, look at the reference codes, and then go all the way to the back of the ACS and translate those codes into the specific FAA documents, like the PHAC or the Airplane Flying Handbook or other advisory circulars, and etc. When you ask where you're at the ACS and you actually go through the ACS and pull up the references, that shows the DPE that you truly understand the ACS and you know exactly where to find those references. Alright, that's every tip I have for the oral exam, and if anybody has any other tips that they like, maybe if you're a CFI or even an examiner and there's other tips that I may have missed, drop them down in the comments below. So, next we have the 10 tips for the flight portion of your Checkride. Now, tip number 11, and this is really a quick tip, but if you plan on dressing a little bit nicer than usual for your Checkride, for example, you want to wear dress shoes, then what you should do is a few flights before your actual Checkride flight, actually wear those shoes while flying during those practice flights. The feeling will be different, and when you fly a few flights before, you'll get used to the feeling of those dress shoes versus maybe the sneakers that you've been wearing or boots during your normal training flights. Now, tip number 12, and please do not forget about this, but it's still important to stay well slept, well fed, and well hydrated before your Checkride. Like I said before, you want to treat this as if you're actually going to fly to that place. And if you were running on 3 hours of sleep, you haven't had water in the last 24 hours, and you haven't eaten anything since the morning of yesterday, it's not a good idea to fly, especially when you're going through all these nerves going through the Checkride. And I know a story about a student who actually failed a Checkride because he was dehydrated and he was starting to zone out a little bit during the flight. It was hot out in the summer, and because he was zoning out, the DPE saw that as lack of taking care of himself and poor decision making, and that led to a Checkride bust. So please take care of yourself. Now, tip number 13, it's always important to make your examiner feel as comfortable as possible. You don't want to make them nervous by any means. So one easy way to bring them peace of mind is to actually read your checklist out loud. Don't run through your checklist silently. When you speak them out loud, they know that you've run through them, and when you say checklist complete, they know that you have completed them. And it makes them feel much better, and as an instructor myself, it definitely makes me feel better when my students verbally go through their checklist. And if there's any CFIs watching this, you probably agree with that. So read those checklists out loud and call out checklist complete during your Checkride. Now, tip number 14, this is a quick one, but please don't forget this, and that is to actually clear for traffic before doing your maneuvers. It's written in black and white in the ACS. If you fail to clear for traffic, that could lead to an unsatisfactory. on your check ride, so please do not forget to clear for traffic. That's all. Now, tip number 15, and this is going to give you a little bit more peace of mind. If you're doing a maneuver, for example, and you're slightly getting out of the tolerances or the standards, what you want to do is you want to own it. You want to out loud say, I'm getting out of the tolerances here, but then make the corrective action. Tell them what you're doing to make that corrective action and get back into those standards. If you do that, the ACS says that it will be satisfactory. But if you fail to make the corrective action, then it's unsatisfactory. So for example, if you're doing a steep turn and let's say you're climbing a little bit too high, so you're going 120 feet above your starting altitude, then you want to call out, okay, I'm getting a little too high here. Let's bring back some power, alleviate a little bit of back pressure, and then you get back down into those standards, and then you finish it off within these standards, and then you'll be good to go. Now, tip number 16 is that when you're flying, you always want to be on the lookout for potential landing spots throughout the entire duration of the flight. Whether it is any fields or any nearby airstrips, you just want to be on the lookout and be aware of your surroundings, because you never know if the DPE is going to pull your throttle and do the emergency engine out procedure on you at any given moment. And of course, more importantly, you never know if your engine may actually fail in real life. So this isn't just good practice for your check ride, but this is good practice for your overall safety as a pilot years on. So always be on the lookout for potential landing spots when flying. Now let's say you actually are going through that simulated emergency procedure. One of the best ways to approach it is you want to get to your best glide speed, but to do that, actually hold your altitude and let the plane slowly get down to the glide speed. And while that plane is slowing down, look out for potential landing spots and run any quick checklist items in the meantime, so that by the time you get to your glide speed, you have completed many other tasks, and now you can focus on other things and actually executing that simulated emergency landing or real landing if you're going through that scenario in real life. By the way, that is a tip that an actual examiner taught me in my private check ride, so pretty good advice. Tip number 18, something to always keep in mind, and that is a go-around is not a failed landing. A go-around is a systematic decision. So if you feel like your airplane is going to have a rough landing, do not try to force it down just for the sake of trying to impress your examiner. Just go around and give it another shot. And the next time, get a much better and more stabilized approach the second time around, and you'll do better that time. Tip number 19 is that the ACS is the bread and butter of all check rides. So for all of your maneuvers, every takeoff and landing, please be familiar with all of those ACS requirements for the flight portion as well. And then finally, the last tip of the flight portion for your check ride is to remember that the check ride is not over until the plane is tied down. So please do not forget to tie down the plane and do the proper shutdown procedures. That's all. And those are your 10 tips for the flight portion of your check ride. So now I'm going to give you the 4 tips that I have to put you in the right mindset for your check ride. All right, tip number 1 for your mindset is that always remember that check rides are about when things go wrong, not when things go right. So always be on top of emergency procedures, any potential deviations, or anything that may go wrong, whether it's squawk codes, any kind of emergency memory items for your particular aircraft. Always stay on top of that and always be able to make a plan B. That's what the check ride is about. And if you can do that, then the rest should take care of itself. Now, the second thing, and the second half of what this check ride is about, is that you are the PIC. So it's important that you actually act like it during this check ride. This check ride is not about if you can fly in a plane. Well, you've been doing that for the last 40 to 80 hours before this check ride. The purpose of this check ride is so that you can be the pilot in command. That's what it's all about. Enforce those safety standards and be prepared for when things go wrong, as a true PIC should. And a true PIC knows what to do when there's any kind of emergency or any kind of abnormality going on in the flight. So always put yourself in that PIC mindset. If you feel like you're falling short of it at the moment, then always look for ways to do better. Now, tip number 23 is that you actually do know more than you really think you do. So please avoid overthinking things. Most of the time, they're not going to try to trick you and do anything crazy out of this world. There's really 2 things that examiners are looking for when conducting the check ride. The first thing is that you are going to be safe. And then the second thing is they are going to make sure that you are going to do things legally and by the book. So you know more than you think you do, just do not overthink everything. They're not looking for perfection. The standard is safety and legality. And then finally, my last tip for the mindset: if you are watching this video and you actually have failed a Checkride or two before, it's not the end of the world. And I just want you to really understand that. So I've failed 2 of my Checkrides. I failed my private Checkride and my flight instructor Checkride. I know many airline pilots who have failed multiple Checkrides. So please do not let it get you down. And if you're afraid of potential interviews in the future, like with the airlines, the most important thing is, if you have failed Checkrides, just know what have you learned from it and how did you become a better pilot because of it. So that's everything I have for this video. If you found it helpful, then please leave a comment and a like, and consider subscribing. That really does help out here. And good luck to you on your Checkride. So that's all I have, and take care, and let's take flight.